science. I'm Mr. Tesch, and welcome to Global Chat, where we explore the ins and outs of the field of study known as comparative politics. In this video, we're going to learn about electoral systems, or how democratic states count the votes that their citizens cast. Now I know what you're thinking. What? Different ways of counting votes? Whoever gets the most votes wins, right? Sort of, yes. But there are some major differences as well. What geographic groups get representation in government, and how much representation do they get? Do people vote for candidates, political parties, or both? Exactly which government officials do citizens get to elect? These are the kinds of questions that we have to consider in this video. To begin, let's talk about legislative electoral systems, which are the various methods by which countries choose groups of lawmakers to represent them. First, it will be useful to define the word constituency. A constituency is one of the official areas of a country, and the people who live there that elect someone to represent them. All democracies divide their people geographically into such electoral districts or constituencies. Each constituency has a certain number of seats in the legislature, ranging wildly in number. Argentina, for example, is a country with 24 constituencies, while Nigeria has 360 constituencies. Where borders are drawn matters a lot, especially for ethnic and religious minorities who stand to gain or lose representation based on how these borders are drawn. Now that we know how constituencies work, we can take a look at an example of a country and its electoral system, the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is currently divided into 650 parliamentary constituencies. One member of parliament in the House of Commons represents a single constituency, made up of, on average, 66,000 voters. The method of counting votes used in the United Kingdom is called single-member district electoral system. What that means is that each district receives one representative in the House of Commons, and whoever receives a plurality or the most votes in a district gets to represent that district as a member of parliament. A plurality, by the way, is when a candidate does not need to win 50% or more of the vote in a district, just more than the other candidates in the race. This is also called first-past-the-post voting, a term borrowed from the sport of horse racing. In single-member district systems, votes cast for other candidates are essentially wasted, because whoever wins the most votes reaps all the rewards. This is kind of a disadvantage of SMD electoral systems, because most people are unwilling to vote for candidates from smaller political parties that don't have a chance of coming in first place. This is why SMD systems often lead to two-party systems, like they have in the United States, Canada, and in the United Kingdom. To understand this better, let's use the 2017 general election results in the United Kingdom. The Conservative Party won only about 42% of the popular vote, but because they won in a larger number of electoral districts, the party received almost 49% of the seats in the House of Commons. Meanwhile, the Labour Party won about 40% of the popular vote, but because they won less electoral districts than the Conservatives, they also only received about 40% of seats in the House of Commons. The Liberal Democratic Party is the one that loses out the most. While Liberal Democratic candidates won 7.4% of the British public support, the party received less than 2% of the seats in the House of Commons. This makes it perfectly clear why voters might be discouraged from choosing representatives from smaller parties like the Liberal Democrats in future elections, especially because controlling only 2% of the seats means the Liberal Democratic members of Parliament have little to no say in what laws do and don't get passed. At this point, we should pause to consider an important question. If the point of democracy is to give all of society some representation in government, what kind of electoral system would lead more parties to being represented in a legislature? The answer is something called a proportional representation electoral system. Proportional representation electoral systems work very differently than single-member district systems. In a proportional representation system, districts have more than one seat, and voters then cast their ballots for a party rather than for individual candidates. The percentage of votes that one party receives in a district determines how many seats of that district that party gains. Let's say the United Kingdom had used this kind of system in 2017 and had decided that the entire country was one big electoral district rather than 650 smaller ones. In this case, the Conservatives would still control the most seats in Parliament, approximately equal to the 42% of the votes that they got. The Labour Party would see very little change from before, but the Liberal Democratic Party would control 7% of the seats in Parliament, a significantly larger number of seats than they wound up controlling under the first-past-the-post system. If the United Kingdom held proportional elections, even smaller political parties like the Liberal Democrats in the UK would stand a good chance of winning some representation in the legislature. This is because the percentage of votes a party receives is proportional to the percent of seats that they actually get. But critics of proportional electoral systems also rightly point out that this is a double-edged sword, because while most people would agree that even smaller political parties ought to have the chance to win representation in government, these groups can sometimes represent rather extreme political views. In this case, proportional elections would backfire in a sense, providing extreme parties that would otherwise stand no chance a path to some legislative power, and all of the advantages that come with that power. One last important feature of proportional representation electoral systems is that they make coalition governments more likely, because single parties are less likely to be able to command a majority of seats than they are in SMD systems. The more parties that are represented in a legislature, the more interesting things get, as the likelihood for unstable governments increases with the number of contending views. As you can see, there are distinct advantages and disadvantages to both proportional representation and single member district electoral systems. Because of this, many constitutions around the world provide for what we might call mixed electoral systems that combine the best features of FSMD and PR systems. Among the countries that we study, Mexico is one that uses a very interesting electoral system. Like the United States, Mexico has a bicameral legislature. One house is called the Senate, and the other is called the Chamber of Deputies. You can think of Mexico's Chamber of Deputies as kind of like the House of Representatives in the United States, except that it is made up of 500 members who each serve 3-year terms. Of these, 300 are elected from single-member district constituencies based on plurality, and 200 are elected based on proportional representation. Elections for Mexico's Senate are even more complicated. Each of Mexico's 31 states and Mexico City elect 3 senators. Political parties run 2 candidates as a pair, and voters choose whichever political party they feel best represents them. The winning party in each state wins the first 2 seats, and the political party that comes in second place wins the one remaining seat. This all adds up to about 96 seats, but there are another 32 seats in the Senate that are elected by proportional representation based on party support in a nationwide vote. The most recent election in Mexico was held in 2018, and it resulted in the surprise victory of a new political party, Morena, or the National Regeneration Movement. Morena started out as a nonprofit organization formed back in 2011 by current President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and had a stated goal of reducing corruption and eliminating electoral fraud in Mexico. Currently, Morena is part of a majority coalition in the Chamber of Deputies, but no political party or coalition currently controls a majority of the seats in the Senate. Because of this, the legislature has not passed many laws that the Mexican people would support, which is a situation that political scientists call gridlock. This inability of a legislature to pass laws is especially common in presidential systems, where different political interests are sometimes represented in the legislative and executive branches, often leading one to overrule the other. So far, we've only talked about legislative elections, though. In most countries in the world, elected legislatures like the ones that we've discussed work together to create laws. Because they represent constituents with such different interests and needs, legislators often have to compromise with each other to write legislation that they can agree to vote for, and often vote for laws supported by an opposition party. But in some countries like the United Kingdom, the people are allowed to vote directly on policy issues in what is called a referendum. We've talked about referendums before on this channel. In our episode on governments, regimes, and states, we mentioned the Scottish devolution referendum of 1997, which was supported by almost 3/4 of the population and allowed for the creation of a Scottish National Assembly. Another consequential referendum held in recent years was the 2011 United Kingdom Alternative Vote referendum, which asked the British public whether they would prefer a single transferable vote system to the single-member district system. Also known as an STV system, this electoral system would essentially have allowed voters to rank their preferred candidates. Because the system would have benefited smaller political parties in particular, the Liberal Democratic parties and other minor parties supported the referendum. But this time, over 2/3 of the public voted against it. In this case, the referendum did not pass. But perhaps the most consequential referendum ever held in the United Kingdom was the 2016 Leave referendum, which asked voters whether or not they believed the United Kingdom should remain a member state of the European Union, or whether it should Brexit. When David Cameron, the Prime Minister at the time, called for the referendum, he never imagined that it would pass. Because leaving the European Union will bring with it serious economic consequences, members of Parliament have struggled since its passing to find agreement on the exact terms of this British exit. Even now, it is still unclear exactly when or under what terms the United Kingdom will cease to be a member state of the European Union. In states with a presidential or semi-presidential system, we should also consider the rules in place for the election of presidents. In Russia, the president is directly elected, but the Russian constitution requires that he or she wins a majority, and not just a plurality of the popular vote. In the 1996 election, for example, the top two presidential candidates were Boris Yeltsin and Gennady Zyuganov. Neither of them won more than 40% of the vote. When this happens, the Russian constitution calls for a second round, or runoff election, to determine a clear winner. In the end, Yeltsin won with nearly 54% of the vote in this runoff. Another major state that uses a two-ballot majority system is Iran. Since the adoption of its constitution in 1979, though, Iran has never needed to hold a runoff election, as every presidential candidate has won a majority of the vote. The only time Iran came close to needing a runoff election was in 2011, when presidential candidate Hassan Rouhani defeated his opponent Mohammad Ghalibaf with a mere 50.7% of the vote. To understand why some states have a two-ballot majority system, we can look at the example of Mexico, where a candidate only needs to win a plurality of the vote to become president. From 1994 to 2012, no presidential candidate won a majority of the vote. In fact, when Felipe Calderon assumed the office of the presidency with a mere 36% of the public support, that was the lowest amount of support ever. With so little support, we say that a president does not have a clear national mandate. In order to really represent a constituency or group of people, a leader who wins more than half of the vote clearly has a more legitimate mandate to govern than one who does not. This idea is central to the principle of representative democracy. At least, that's how it worked until 1988, when members of the PRI started to split with the party and form a new party known as the National Democratic Front, a left-wing coalition that was the precursor for Mexico's modern Partido Revolucionario Democrático, or PRD. When PRI candidate Carlos Salinas de Gortari won with a mere 50.4% of the vote, public outrage followed, along with claims of election fraud. Since then, former President Miguel de la Madrid has confirmed that the 1980 election in Mexico was in fact rigged, and a study in the American Political Science Review claims that perhaps millions of ballots had either been altered or discarded altogether in that election. Another country that we will be studying that has a reputation of committing electoral fraud is Russia. In order to ensure the continued dominance of a political party known as United Russia, the government has gone to great lengths to keep opposition parties and potentially competitive candidates off of ballots. A good example is Alexei Navalny, a Russian political activist who leads the Progress Party and has sharply criticized corruption in President Vladimir Putin's government. Navalny has been arrested several times by Russian authorities and has received 2 suspended sentences on alleged embezzlement charges. But the European Court of Human Rights determined that Navalny's right to a fair trial was violated in both cases. In 2016, Navalny was banned from running against current President Vladimir Putin. More recently, an organization that Navalny founded called the Anti-Corruption Foundation was forced to register as a foreign agent in Russia, which is a pretty blatant attempt to stifle the organization's activities. This kind of retaliation for challenging Putin or United Russia has become increasingly common and is part of the reason why Russia is called an illiberal democracy. In order to further solidify United Russia's hold on power even further, Russia has also made several changes to its electoral system. From 2002 until 2003, half of the seats in the State Duma or parliament were chosen based on proportional representation, and the other half based on single-member districts. This system was again changed under Putin's watch so that all the seats would be based on proportional representation, with a 7% threshold, both pushing smaller parties out of parliament while also ensuring that United Russia would continue to hold power in upcoming elections. When in 2013 it looked as though these changes would no longer benefit Putin's party, the electoral system was reverted back to the mixed electoral system with a 5% threshold. What is really remarkable here is that the rules of government continue to be changed in order to benefit those in power. Even the term limits of the presidency have been tinkered with. Vladimir Putin was originally elected in 2000 and was re-elected in 2004 to serve his second 4-year term. The Russian constitution limits presidents to serving only 2 consecutive terms. The key word is consecutive. In 2008, Putin was appointed by then-President Dmitry Medvedev to serve as prime minister for 4 years. But in 2012, he was elected yet again to the office of presidency, this time to serve 2 consecutive 6-year terms. This is because 2012 was the year when amendments passed by the legislature 4 years earlier that altered the presidential term limit took effect. Here again, we have an example of Putin's government making major structural changes to laws and norms in order to benefit himself. In this video, we've examined the different ways in which legislatures and executives are elected, talked about referendums in the United Kingdom, and have even taken a closer look at how some countries have had a history of corrupt elections. For more information and additional resources, please check in the description below this video. And remember to subscribe to catch more of our videos. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.